I think the last 4 years we've seen a lot of change, and actually this is a culmination of a whole number of events. In fairness to everybody, and you have experienced it firsthand, the last 4 years have been a bit like a perfect storm. We've obviously had high inflation, COVID, cost of living crisis, staffing shortages, Brexit, everything thrown. So it has been a remarkably difficult. But I think it's those difficulties that have actually acted as a catalyst for change now. And again, as we get into the speakers, I'll be really interested to hear their views about why they see change coming as well. I think one of the things we've noticed particularly is that all parties across the spectrum now know that no one has all the answers. So actually the more collaborative we can be, the more open we can be in discussions, then actually the better. And actually that's been driven particularly, I found, from client organisations who have, I think, often felt they're squeezed between their CFO and the caterer about what do we do, how do we do it better, how do we get people back to work, how do we create greater environments. The consumer too has changed and looking for higher expectations. I saw a research report recently that said 73% of all consumers will now leave a venue if they have one bad experience, even if it was a loved experience, a loved venue. So the expectations changing, standards are rising all the time, the bar's rising all the time, everyone's under more pressure to improve. And I think that's also putting in extra pressure on operators. So I think we've got to understand that. But at the same time, it's putting extra pressure on clients and on consultants. And I think for consultants, which often been a big debating area, but have a huge role to play, and actually probably more of a role to play than ever, because that's that real middleman and independent person who can make a difference. But how do we make sure that's the case? And how do we make sure there's a real proper discussion going on? And I'm sure we'll be welcome views on that. I had one or two interesting conversations earlier about how do we actually make sure that even the process itself starts in the right place. So we've got a conversation on that to take place. But all over the market we're finding this conversation break out. And actually, as I said, today is really the first of a whole series of discussions we want to do on this. We're also launching a whole number of discussions on productivity in the workplace. So actually, how does workplaces and work environments change as well, which we'll be launching a bit later, because it all interlinks together, and actually make sure as an industry we're moving forward. As I said, be interactive. Please ask questions as we go. We want this. Success to me at the end of this is how do we actually start developing this narrative that engages clients, operators, consultants positively to make sure we're really driving this forward. So I welcome your views. And let's also be aware there's both, I'll say this because we've got in the room today, both new, young, smaller independents setting up with their own vision who are going to be competitive, and also some large, major US corporations come to into the UK market is going to shake things up as well, and how that's going to be as well. So that's going to be interesting to watch as we go. So the market's going to get more competitive once again, and actually it's probably one of the most exciting periods of time we've seen probably for close to the last 20 years. Just to kind of lay the ground as their views on collaboration, partnership. Do we want it? Is it improving? Is it changing? And do you see light on that? John?
Well, I think sorry, is this on? Can you hear me?
Has it got a green light?
Yeah, use that.
Yeah, green light, that's it.
Hello? There we go. Well, if I said no to that, it would be quite a short event. We'll start off with the question. Yeah, look, I run a division of Compass that looks after sports and leisure, and I think what we've tried to do over the last 3 or 4 years is be more collaborative and not be. I've been in the industry a long time, and for a long period of time, it was all about trying to get exclusivity, try and control everything, and there's always that, jack of all trades problem. And what we've tried to do over the last couple of years is be an umbrella organisation almost to bring in really good entrepreneurial companies to work alongside us. We made investments in Curb and Peppermint, but those companies do operate very much as independent companies and have their own management team and their own vision. And we could talk maybe about the National Theatre later, which I think is a good example where we've taken a more partnership approach to come up with a really, really good solution. I'm also hugely passionate about sustainability. We've got a 2027 net zero agenda in the UK and Ireland, and that's meant we've had to really, really go very deep into our supply chain to understand the relationships with producers, and again look beyond the traditional huge corporations that have traditionally supplied Compass to say actually we need to get to the smaller producers, we need to get to the entrepreneurs that are making a difference, that have an agenda that mirrors ours, and give them commitments around supply, give them commitments around volume, give them commitments that we want to work with them in partnership. It's not just a pricing conversation. It can't just be a pricing conversation. It needs to be, how do we all grow and develop together to make it a much more positive experience. But in general, I think the industry is hugely changing. You're right, Chris. There are a couple of huge American organisations coming at the moment. I think it is post-COVID also a really exciting time for smaller independents to get involved. And we all need that competition, and we should embrace it, and we should work together where we can, but at least feed off our ideas and best practice. I think the other bit around collaboration and partnership with clients that massively changed in my time, when I started with Levy, it's 10 years this year, most of our contracts were concession contracts, so we were paying a percentage of sales back to the client. They're all commercial contracts in the main line. And now the vast majority are either profit shares or legal joint ventures. And I think that really has changed the dial in the client conversation, that they are business owners alongside us, that when we're talking about, for Jockey Club's a good example I always use, where the Jockey Club used to be a concession agreement, now is a profit share. So we're having joined up conversations about how we run the entire business. It's not one party is looking at the sales, the other party is looking at the bottom line. We're both looking at the full P&L, making considered decisions on what's best for the customer, and how do we really drive forward the health of the business in the long term. And that's been hugely beneficial. So you are generally sitting down with clients now in a partnership conversation rather than just a commercial one.
Before we go to Chris, the other thing, of course, and you made a big point about it, Alex Partners, is about your whole mantra is different to what people would expect from Compass at Levy. Is that fair?
Well, it depends what people expect from Compass, I guess. Look, my impression of Compass before I joined, and it was 10 years ago, was very different. Once you're inside, Compass is full of people, the same any business. There's some very good people, some very, very passionate people, and there's a whole spectrum. But ultimately, what we try to do in Levy, and when we set the strategy at Levy 5 years ago when I became MD, was every decision we make is through the lens of is it doing the right thing for our people, for our customers, but equally for the planet. And that's not a trite thing, it's not a tick box. We've changed the ethos and the culture of the company. So back of house, we retrained chefs to understand why I'm passionate about certain ingredients or certain supply chains, why we want to approach it. We had, speaking openly, we had lots of people, the majority of our variable staff, we employed tens of thousands of people in variable staff, they were getting paid the minimum wage. And now everyone in my business is on either London living wage or the regional living wage equivalent, regardless of age and regardless of job type. And that culturally is very different. We give every single person who works at one of my large venues a hot meal. We've just opened in Amsterdam. We took over a small independent that operated at that venue for 27 years. Same people coming for the first time, we were there giving them a hot meal before they started their shift. 7-8 hour shift. Previously they wouldn't have been fed. And you're like, you could just see the light bulb of them going, oh, okay, I'm now working for a company that cares about my well-being, and the fact that if you're going to work hard for 6-7 hours, having something simple like a hot meal, where by the way it was -3 at the time, windchill factor was probably -10, so you really needed something and sustenance to keep you going. I think that investment in those kind of ideas and projects are as important as anything else.
That's fair. Chris?
Everything John just said. I might just take a different angle. So I've been with Compass Group for 17 years. I've been in the industry for over 2 decades. I've been in out of ops and business development. At the moment, I support John's business and sit across the 5 other sectors in Compass Group. My standout observation, I think everyone will share this, is that 5 years ago, the drivers for change in clients and consumers were far more minimalistic in the most respectful manner than what it is now. By that, what I mean is operating models, delivery models, and P&Ls were far more certain. For example, deflationary periods meant cost certainty. Operating models meant that you could run your P&L through a conventional format, but the food might be different on the plate, which separated companies from A to B. What I've seen now, and I think we all have, is that all operating models are different. The inclusion of CPUs and in between hybrid models and flexible working is something that is here to stay. And cost certainty isn't there. But what is the same is the way in which we tender. The way in which businesses tender for business remains pretty much the same as it did 5 years ago. So a question that we've been asking ourselves in our business specifically is, how do we reverse the buying process to make it a bit more push-pull? How do we make it more collaborative whilst, I use the analogy, if you've lived in your house for 20 years and you feel like retiling your kitchen, you're more than likely going to go back to the process you did 20 years ago to say, well, this is how I did it last time, so this is how I do it again. But the world has changed, and so I feel like the process for tendering or procuring should start backwards from a let's research, let's meet, let's understand, let's formulate the tender, and then we know what we want. And I think we'll all agree there's not much in it between any of us, be it independent or big. It's the people and the culture and the way you tackle difficult conversations that ultimately wins the prize, as it were. So one of my call to actions, and Chris and I have been talking about it for quite a while now, is how do we review the tendering process with the right ethics, with the right thought leader, in the right impartial environment that can support our consumers and our clients make the best procuring decisions. That's probably call out number one. The second piece links to that, which is, and I'm mindful that I work with many consultants, so I want to retain those relationships. But I think it's worth acknowledging that the most impartial thought leaders in this room are the consultants. The biggest voices are the consultants. I remember the Alex Partners event 2 years ago, and Chris gave praise to the industry and to the small independents and the big ones for surviving COVID. What really frustrated me is that consultants didn't get a call out, and it made me question myself as to what have consultants done to lead the change and the charge and the change of narrative in the time that COVID happened. The hospitality industry was doing everything it could to survive and look after its people, particularly the smaller independents. Mindful that I do work for Compass, so slightly more protected, but the point remains, I think the consultants have a huge voice to take whatever action we get out of today forward, because it's an impartial view. And the third one, like to John, I am super passionate about social value and people and opportunities in particular. I'm very keen around real living wage, London living wage. And again, it kind of goes back to point one of how do we reverse the narrative and the process with our end buyers, as in procurement, to educate them on our industry, the people that are within it, and those that need to be paid more to survive. And I think that kind of ends with the commercial model. So kind of three call-outs for me, which is just the collaboration end-to-end, the push-pull between procurement, consultants and catering providers, the thought leadership within consultants and the power of the voice that you have, and the third one is around social value, always looking after our people as we do it.
Thank you. Joe, I'm going to be desperately unfair and ask you, because we had a chat before about this process, didn't we, at tenders? Do you mind just, do you want to say your view quickly?
Yes, I mean, my view was that that we can speak about collaboration from the contractor's point of view, and obviously it is in the contractor's interest to have a much more collaborative process. I think on the consultants, certainly as us as consultants, are looking to create much more collaborative processes. But I think there's a big education on the client's part to educate the client. And not just the lead client, but the various stakeholders involved in the process. So you might have the legal teams, you might have the procurement teams, who you were saying, will have a very conventional, risk-averse type of approach to to tendering. And I think it's all of we have to find a way to educate the client, and to educate the client to select the right people to run their procurement process in order for those truly collaborative processes, as well as the actual outcomes, to emerge. Because I think unless we do that, I think, and that's very much dependent on individuals, certain characters within organisations that might have share the collaborative view, but that's certainly not the case everywhere. And certainly when you start moving into the public sector, it's even worse. We're talking about the private sector here, but there's a big opportunity, or there's a need within the public sector as well, to really change mindsets. And I think we need to find a way of engaging with perhaps broader organisations like procurement organisations to actually start that narrative, the other side of the fence, as well as just us talking about it being. And I think that's what Sarah was saying, that we can talk about it as an industry, but actually we need to make sure everybody, including the client, is fully on board with this type of, or understands why it's so important.
Thank you, Joe. A bit unfair, I'm sorry.
One of the I think you're absolutely right. One of the actions that we've kicked about is, and again it goes back to point 2, is recognising the thought leaders in the camp that are impartial. Is holding a workshop, similar to the crowd that this has gathered, is holding a workshop for anyone interested to learn new ways of tendering, best ways of collaborating, you know, what's out in the market linked specifically to operating models, whatever it may be. I think a good crowd would come from the private sector in particular to get some form of new tool or new way of getting them the maximum out of their budget for what their consumers are looking for. That could be one action that us as an industry could enforce or could launch.
Yeah.
No,
I think the other thing I was going to say is, to your point, what we do very, you know, I wouldn't say we push hard, but what we kind of insist on is there's your compliant proposal aligned to what you're looking for. Here's a non-compliant that just pushes the boundaries, you know, might make you think differently. Let's talk about it. You know, some you'll find are, you know, just ignored, but others, and I think, you know, a la John here with the National Theatre example, that's where you get some real transformation.
John, do you want to talk about the National Theatre before we kick on? About what you've done there?
Sure. So, National Theatre during COVID basically shut all their F&B. It was quite hard for them to get going again. It's essentially a semi-public body. And I think they engaged with you, Chris, to say, okay, what kind of organisation could take on the F&B? They've got restaurants, they've got bars, they've got theatre bars, they've got cafes. It's a big campus. And I think in their mind they didn't want a traditional contract catering approach. So the idea that they talked to Compass or Levy was a bit alien. You know, they weren't that keen on talking to me or the organisation. But what we tried to say is, look, and I don't like traditional sales conversations. I'm not really big on presentations or formality or process, much to Chris's disappointment. But what I like to do is try and get across the personality of the company and the vision of what we're trying to create, and the fact that we're open to new ideas. And what we were able to do for the National Theatre is to give them the comfort, which they needed as a large organisation, that they were going to deal with a company that was going to be around in 10 years' time, that had the balance sheet that could, because there was a lot of capital requirement to refurbish certain areas, but equally that we would also foster entrepreneurial talent, and that we wouldn't come in and just say, no, it's going to be the Levy way or the Compass way and that's it. So we very much put curb front and centre of our bid. There was some obvious areas in the understudy, if you know the building, where there were, you know, curb food traders could exist within the building, also outside for summer activations and winter activations. So we've had, since we started, I think at least probably 20-25 different street food traders there, and the curb ecosystem. These are all London-based, independent entrepreneurs. They're not big brands, they're not companies that operate outside of that. It's an incubation system for talent. Ideally, they come out of the curb system and go onto the high street. There's lots and lots of companies that you'll have eaten at, you know, Pizza Pilgrims and Bleecker Burger and Bow, that originally started as curb traders. So the idea that the National wanted to support London entrepreneurs and London businesses was available through that ecosystem. Then they have two what were quite traditional formal restaurants, you know, pre-theatre restaurants. That it's quite if anyone's ever been involved in theatre restaurants, they're quite difficult, because you know, ultimately you get very busy till about 7:30 and then you're dead. But you're paying people to be there to service the chef team. So we wanted to bring in restaurateurs that could bring that second wave of guests once the theatre had started. And we knew, in truth, that a Levy restaurant or a Levy experience wasn't going to do that. And it's been big enough to say that and admit it and go, you know what, we're very good at certain things, but we're not so brilliant at others. And actually, why not partner with people that have a great reputation for high street restaurants? So we went to the Marksman, which is a great, and this was through the Curb links, we went to the Marksman, which runs a great gastro pub in North London, and they took over what was the traditional house restaurant. We put all the capex in, so for a small company like that, we wouldn't normally be able to raise the money. We fronted the capital, we did a commercial deal that allows us to depreciate over a long time, that allow them to operate. They run the restaurant themselves, it's their front of house, their back of house within the ecosystem. And then we opened a second restaurant called Forza Win. If everyone's been to the Forza, we've got 3 or 4 other locations in South London, starting in Peckham. Brilliant, I mean, two brilliant entrepreneurs. Bash and Michael, who started it up, really passionate about biodynamic organic wines, but really, I mean, Michael's the culinary genius as well, just small plates, small, accessible, really well priced, you know, a little bit of an Italian influence, but quite eclectic. So you can go there, have 3 or 4 small plates, and it's not stupidly priced. It's, you know, £7-8 a dish. It's not crazy. Laston, run by the Marksman, is a more formal, higher priced experience. So your traditional theatre goer, national member would gravitate towards that. But no, what we're seeing now is we're getting that second. But
it's one of the shifts, isn't it? Is that 10 years ago, Compass probably would have tried to do it all themselves. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100%. And I think most contract caterers have that mentality. You know, the first thing when you sit down with your legal team, what's the exclusivity provision? Have you got exclusivity? Absolutely everything. You know, well, no, we don't need it. You know, and that's a bad thing. You know, we actually you know, the more you open out, and the more you say, actually, we're going to bring people in who. You know, because the example I always give, a curb street food trader that makes, I don't know, a fried chicken sandwich, that person's done it day in, day out on a wet street food market for 10 years. That's their passion, making that single product. And I don't care whether it's sushi or a chicken sandwich, whatever it is. The idea that I asked one of my chefs, who were also, by the way, probably doing 3,000 covers of hospitality in that stadium, and I go, well, can you make me the world's best fried chicken sandwich? And quite rightly, you know, I can make you an okay one, but you know, but probably not as good as the street food trader that's done it for 10 years. And why not just be open to that and actually give them a chance?
But that's
they would never have the experience or the opportunity to be in a big venue.
I think the point is you took them on the journey. They had no idea what they wanted until you showed them the journey, and they bought into it. It was collaborative, wasn't it? Two-way.
It was collaborative, but the sustainability is what they switched them. And that's also one of the big changes, because you must be seeing sustainability everywhere, aren't you? Coming as one of the core pillars?
Yeah, I mean, for the go back to this changing dynamics 5 years ago, it was kind of a question on a tender, have you got a policy? You tick the box, or you say yes, and you move on. Now, you know, it's always front and centre. In fact, statistically, out of all the bids last year, we measured the client drivers within the top 5, 95% of them had sustainability in the top 5. So, of course it is, but I see that's quite a disingenuous point. You either have it in your DNA as an organisation that sustainability is important, or you don't. It's not something you craft towards a client driver. So, you know, it's around to stay. I think, you know, ours is 2030, John's is 2027. I think the most important thing now I'm finding with sustainability is the transition plan task force. We did the introduction of the disclosure framework, which will go through the greenwashing tactics and go through your statements and look more around measurements and progress. So, you know, candidly, what I'm looking forward to is actually, given ours is based on measurement and progress, we should be well positioned. But from an elevated perspective of caring about the industry, what I fear in sustainability is that there will be greenwashing and companies will be exposed, but it will be a detriment to the industry, not the providers. So, you know, another call to action on that point really is how you explore the tender process to ensure that what you're saying you're doing or what your commitments are truly measured. Because if the consultants and the thought leaders don't take that approach now, we'll be front page news in 2 years, you know, 18 months. The FCA are already talking about it being audited. So I think we need to get ahead as an industry in order to just firm up our own housekeeping, use the consultants as critical friends to make sure that we are on track with what we're saying and it's truly measured. So that in 18 months, 2 years, once the FCA comes out and starts auditing it, we're protected and we don't end up as front page news.
So look, we've been talking about, you and I have been talking about this now for close to a year, this whole subject. What would you like to see come out of today, and what would you like to see going forward from today?
So I'll talk in a bold sense and slightly aspirational, and we can probably work back from there. I personally would like to see an impartial network formed that develops a charter of guiding principles for partnering with providers, that educates and brings the best out of our industry and people by sharing best practice to get exactly what they need for their consumers, even when they don't know. Because, you know, as a good example of that, what we're seeing in our business particularly is the greatest partnerships and levels of collaboration equals longevity and success in partnerships and contracts. And what we also find is that the best solutions are delivered because it's less binary in your bid says this, therefore deliver this. It becomes more discussional, more collaborative, and what you often find is that you kick it about enough where the end solution for the consumer works and everyone's happy. And I think we can all resonate where, you know, relationships don't start off in the right way because perhaps the solution wasn't best at the start, but with some right engagement and collaboration it could have been slightly tweaked to get the best out. So, you know, we've talked about this a lot, and there's been another workshop with around the consultants probably 4 or 5 months ago, and I know from old, I say old, use that word lightly, but I think a few years ago there may have been some form of charter
There was, yeah.
that was introduced. But look, more than anything, I want our industry to shine in the best way possible. I want our industry to move ahead. Sometimes you've got to take the barriers away from being competitors and just say we're better as one as we are as, you know, point or decimals. And I think with an environment like this, if we can come together to just get some form of charter and discussion and narrative, I think that in its own right will be enough to just, next time that we are working with a client or a potential partner or a consultant, we might just be prompted to ask that question, do we think this is going to get the best outcome for the consumer? And so, yeah, a charter and some discussion, you know, does that work?
That's good. So it'll be interesting your views on that as we go. John, what would you like to see come out of this conversation?
Look, I'd echo Chris's point. You know, we should be prouder of this industry. Not many people know about contract catering. It's very difficult. You know, I'm sure you've all been in parties or friends going, what do you do? And you go, oh, I'm a contract caterer. What, you're a chef? No, I'm not a chef. Do you work on a restaurant? No, I don't work in a restaurant. It becomes very hard to explain what we are as an industry, and we have to be prouder and we have to be a bit more upfront about the great things that we do. I think I'd like us to be agents for change in a positive way. I'd like us to be authentic about our approach to sustainability. I'd like us to get to that end point, you know, that we can do it quicker because we feed more people with a higher volume together. You know, all of the high street and the coffee shop chains, they're all fractured into tiny, tiny bits. We actually hold an awful lot of power in a fairly concentrated number of companies that are represented in this room. And if we all, you know, started sharing a little bit more, if we all find a great producer, or if we find a great vision that will help us all get a bit more along the journey to net zero, well, isn't that great for everyone? You know, it shouldn't just be about being a competitive advantage for me or you to win a bid or not. It should be about us all lifting it up, because ultimately if we don't work together and we don't act as agents of change, we are going to end up in a really, really horrific place for our children and our grandchildren. And that's my point, that politicians aren't going to do it. They have failed consistently and they continue to do it. The general election that's coming up will be fought, unfortunately, on a very polarised point of view on whether you're woke or not woke, green or not green. And I just don't understand that mentality. How can wanting to live on a planet that is livable for our children and our grandchildren be political debate? We should all be getting behind this idea. Whether you're, you know, completely on the left or completely on the right, I don't care. Having a breathable, living ecosystem, having biodiversity, having clean oceans, having waterways that aren't polluted with sewage and plastics, it just shouldn't be a debate. We should just be doing it, and we should be doing it together.
Thank you. Nikki, you wanted to ask questions?
Hi Chris, hi John. My name's Nikki, and just for context, Sue and I own a company called Good Pico, so we make nutritious, tasty and super sustainable plant milks made with pea protein. So we're all about regenerative farming, you know, being recyclable and keeping our lakes and oceans cleaner. In the past, it has been difficult for a small and young brand like ourselves to win a tendering process, so it's really nice to hear that's coming from you as leaders to change that and work more collaboratively. Is there any piece of advice you can give us as a young brand to break into the market and win some of those contracts?
I mean, first of all, yes, it is difficult, and I think, unfortunately, big companies like ours make it hard because we're set up to the idea that we need volume, we need a small number of suppliers, we don't need products, and unfortunately, we probably let procurement departments take the lead in that, and what I've been saying very clearly for the last couple of years is, I'm the MD of my business, I'll make those decisions. The purchasing department should be there to find the right commercial terms, to make sure we're ticking the right boxes on health and safety, and that we've got a route to market. But actually, the sustainability vision, the procurement vision is coming from Levy for our division there. We've also acquired a number of smaller GPOs, I don't know if you've heard of Regency, who have been a great addition to our business because they have a wider span of smaller businesses that they represent. and we're actually working with them to onboard suppliers through Regency in a much, much quicker way if we see a business desire to get there. So if it ticks the box on sustainability, if it ticks the box on it's a product we think our consumers want, and the price is obviously got to be a discussion, but we don't just buy on price. I always use the example, if we'd have stuck on price with eggs, we'd still be using battery eggs. We switched years and years ago to free range. We're switching already to high welfare chicken. We're switching already, away from unsustainable farmed fish, unsustainable farmed seafood to the producers that we know are fronting our business and our brand correctly. So on a quarterly basis, we go out now as a leadership team to visit suppliers, to understand their business and onboard them quickly. It's not still lots of things to jump through, but again, if you hit the metrics that we're looking for as a business, we will work with you.
Thank you. Stefan, are you happy to ask your question about partnership? If I bring a computer thing up, microphone up. On partnership. You wanted to ask a question about partnerships. Make a point. They're happy? Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. How much progress do you think we're really making as an industry? How far have we come in the last couple of years?
In general?
Yeah, in truth. Well, just generally, in partnership,
I think
are we progressing?
Look, I think as an industry, there's been a large number, a small number of large players for a while. I think that's starting to change now. We are seeing lots of great independents coming up. I think it's been a period of time. It's been, Brexit was hard, COVID was terrible. It's been a period of consolidation. The year after COVID was actually the hardest for me because trying to get staff back, trying to get trained staff, they just weren't there. And last year was probably the first full year that it started to feel normal again. And going into this year, I actually have a lot of confidence. Yeah, the economy's not brilliant, but it's steady-ish, and actually the confidence in what we're doing and the industry is positive, I believe. I think people are starting to get attracted in. I think we need to do a lot more work as an industry on the attraction of young people to join it. That's my biggest concern. We don't have a great conveyor belt of talent, certainly, across the country, but certainly in London and the South East, where pre-Brexit, pre-COVID, maybe 60-70% of the workers were coming, not just from Europe, but from all around the world. And summer season for me, where we run the likes of Goodwood and Wimbledon and lots of cricket events, it would not be unusual for us to see lots of Eastern Europeans, also Italians and Spaniards and French and Brazilians coming through. And we just haven't seen that. And obviously it's a lot harder to get working visas, it's a lot harder to come through. And are we seeing the same volume of people coming through traditional hospitality or catering colleges? Are we seeing the same level of expertise? No. It's a real worry. And then when I go around my big events, a lot of my senior chefs are now in their 50s, mid-50s, or in their early 60s. And that's great because they're still passionate, they still want to do it, but where the group below and the group below that, it gets thinner and thinner as you go down. And as an industry, we're facing into a generational population crisis of skill levels in probably 5 to 10 years' time. And unless we act to change that, and we get people involved in apprenticeships within our businesses, on grad schemes, on a wider scale, then I think we'll struggle.
So we've still got a way to go. Chris?
Give some balance to that. If you look at the addressable market size, it's increased. So last year we recognised it to be about 13 billion, 2 years ago. Now we see it more like 15 billion within our industry. That's through 2 avenues. Firstly, increased capability, which we can all boast through the fact that we've all changed our operating models and founded new markets as a result. And the other one is just general growth, particularly in manufacturing. So as an industry, are we in good shape? I think we're well poised. And I think it's encouraging where we've come in the last 2 years. I echo John's points around people, but my kind of optimistic view on that is it just spurs, particularly I can talk on our behalf, of just increasing the amount of academies and investments in our people at every layer, from frontline through to global programs. And I see that on social media with a lot of our competitors. So I think it's well recognised, which is spurring on action internally amongst us. But again, is it a call to action to see what else we can do on a bigger scale? Probably. I think what we find is we do our own things, but we're hunting in the same pool. when it comes to talent. So I think there's something bigger to have as a discussion. As far as kind of solutions and clients, I think we were equally as well poised in the recognition that our end users recognise that employee welfare is the most critical factor that is going to lead the way over the next 3 to 5 years, in that bringing people back to the office or looking after people if there's a pay shortage or skills shortage. Actually, the way to people's heart is the food. So actually, I think we're well poised. I think we're in an encouraged position. But I think in order to optimise all of the opportunities for all of us, we need to kind of elevate the discussion into something more broader as an industry, as opposed to around the boardroom table.
Now you've listened to what Chris and John had to say.
Good luck.
So your thoughts on that, firstly? Do you agree with what they were saying, or do you have a different perspective?
No, I agree from both perspectives on ESG. I think we've invested heavily at Thomas Franks of recent in ESG. There was a question, are we a bit behind the curve? I think absolutely. I think we're all as an industry chasing that. And I absolutely agree with where Chris is coming from. I think when it comes to tenders, it needs to be a win-win-win situation for all, for caterer, consultant and client. And I think there's a bit of rejigging to make that work.
What would you like to see happen?
What would I like to see happen? I think more transparency, Chris. I think I thoroughly enjoy. For me, I started in the industry, and when I was before I become MD of Thomas Franks around 3 years ago now, I did a stint 3 years in sales at the start of COVID, and I found during that process consultants to be very useful. They know the good, the bad and the ugly. They know the industry. I think just tighter collaboration, more openness. We want to work with like-minded clients who buy into Thomas Franks, I guess, for what Thomas Franks is. And it's not a problem if a client is better suited to an alternative provider. That's absolutely fine. So I think, that's what I'd probably like to see.
Renier?
No, absolutely. I think the industry, especially where we are today, has a lot of obstacles that we've overcome, and I think the importance that we're placing on ESG, and also the fact that when we speak to our clients these days, they're expecting us to do more. The old conversation about, look after our coffee shops and look after our restaurants, look at our, that's all changed. We're having conversations about indoor farms, and we're having conversations about how do we kind of engage with the people, and how do we access those small suppliers. So I think our tools, exactly. Yeah, and I think where before we write a tender document and you've got your compliance questions as we allude to those. I think it'd be great to have access and have a bit of conversation. Once we move past that ticking box exercise of actually building a client's experience to what they want. And I think those are the exciting conversations we're having in the industry. I think we need to be operators, we need to be mediators, we need to be everything these days. And I think giving those clients what they need is quite important. I think so that's exciting. And so how we approach that and how we deliver that. With that personal conversation, I think is the key thing for me.
How do you feel about Chris's idea about the charter?
I love the idea, but I think having the opportunity to actually, in this room we've got probably the majority of all caterers and all the people who's got access to the market, to all the answers. So I think if you've got an independent group of people who's actually wanting to make change, there's definitely the ability. And I think the key thing is once you start focusing on something, it will change. And if you've got people who's invested in delivering that, it will change. And I think that's probably the big thing here is every single person in this room will have an objective to deliver, their business goal, their operating model, or whatever the life for the client. But at the end of the day, we're all playing chess with the same pieces, So use those pieces to the best of our advantage and really kind of change the industry. I think it's a great opportunity for us to do that.
Right.
Well, I agree with everything Renier said. I just want to pick up a point regarding suppliers. Obviously, I forgot your name, your company. Nikki. Opportunities to work with new startups needs to be paramount across the whole industry, because I think startups come with the set agenda on ESG, carbon footprint. They already have that. Whereas trying to grind that into suppliers who have been around for 20, 30 years, it makes it a lot more difficult. So, I mean, we'd love to work with more and more startups, and that's a specific thing for Thomas Franks, I guess. But I think we should all probably be more open to that across the industry, to giving the startups the opportunity to grow.
And going back to John and Chris's point about people.
Yeah, it's top of our agenda. I think it absolutely has to be. I mean, I'm fairly young, but I think I'm already concentrating on the next generation of talent and investing at those low levels. And that's not just chefs, that's marketeers, that's financiers, whatever it may be, that helps support our day-to-day, because we forget about the team at head office, don't we? But they help our day-to-day tick. So I think investing at all those levels is so important. So right now we should absolutely be heavily invested in people, ESG, because and tech. Yeah. Because they're the three things that I think right now are really going to push this industry into the next generation.
Last week you had another point you'd like to talk about, which is about the industry collaborating better. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think look, it's a tough question, because I think we're all fairly open to collaboration. Obviously, I didn't know too much about John's story about the collaboration, but I think for us, we're always open to work with like-minded people. For us, charity has been massive, but we've done that with our clients and with other caterers, and for us to support the hospitality industry. You look at obviously Chris and Robbie. Nearly every caterer probably in this room has got behind that row and has been watching their story. We don't do enough of that, and we don't see enough stories like that. There should be so much more that we're doing to invest back into our industry to help it grow.
How are you seeing the sector change? What are your views? John and Chris gave a view about where this sits along the path. How do you see that journey?
Well, I think our industry has definitely taken a step forward into the agenda when it comes to talking. But Hospitality UK has done a fantastic work in lobbying government and getting our names out there. So I think how we evolve this next is really take that opportunity that we have. More so than ever, we are involved with more open conversations about our industry. I think when we speak to people and when we go out and recruit apprentices, I think that it's more up the agenda than it used to be. But what I think how we evolve this now is just making the best of the opportunity that we have, and sharing the successes. I think that's the key part.
Yeah, I think it will continue to change and adapt. I guess we all kind of, especially in the B&I market, we got used to this Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday being the key days. Then you walk into the office on a Tuesday and it's quiet again, and why is it quiet? We as caterers obviously need to drive those people back to the office with our offer, but that's not always going to work. So I think it will still continue to evolve. And I think it'll find its place in.
That's the other interesting conversation, is that clients and companies are now beginning to create new solutions to get people. There's a conversation to get it all the time.
Yeah, and I think the expectation from clients, and probably rightly so, is a lot higher than it's ever been. We don't just put food on a plate and that they buy into the fact that it's fresh. It's all the added value around that. Our nutritionist is very involved. Probably 50-50 involved in our day-to-day, but also from a client perspective in holding talks, whether that be around mental health, whether that be about nutrition in particular. So I think there's that expectation now that as a caterer you provide all these other added value bits to promote their workplace.
And how are you seeing, both in tenders and in client organisations, that shift in conversation now? Are you seeing it come to the fore, or is it just beginning to come through?
No, I think it's there. I think the expectation, obviously, it depends how you do in that tender. I think obviously if it's a one-to-one, it's very open and you can talk about all those great ideas. Obviously you mentioned about 2 different tender specs and kind of putting those ideas in front of a client. I love that. But I think it's there, and I think it will continue to grow. There'll be bigger expectations in the coming years that we need to be prepared for.
Sorry, I was just going to add that I think we are being challenged to really think about, what is really needed these days. And I think a lot of conversations I'm having with some of the clients is about, the destinations that we create in their building. Their teams and their demographic is using the facility completely different than what they have to. And I think as caterers, it's very easy to just fall back into the same way of doing the old hat way of doing things. And I think if approaching every destination as an experience is really key. And then how we engage from the sustainable message, also the environment and the entire package it needs to be kind of also included in that.
Mm-hmm. One of the big things which obviously John and Chris talked about earlier as well is trust. Mm-hmm. We've got a great industry, we need to make a better statement. It's about building trust there, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
Oh, without a doubt. I think, I don't want to just talk about Thomas Franks. The way we've set up the business though is with that in mind, and is with client relationships. So across our network, we've got 6 regional directors. We've got operators don't pick up more than 10 contracts. The reason for that is so that individual can build that trust and that relationship one-to-one with that client, can be available the majority of the time. That's been really big for us. I get it don't work across the industry because that's an investment from Thomas Franks, but it's massive. So the minute you break that trust or lose that trust, it's so hard to get it back.
Most of the times, the reason why the tender's there in the first place. It's a loss of trust, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's one of the shifts we're seeing, I think, there's greater trust in the partnerships.
Yeah. I actually think that, when we engage with our clients and when we talk in the industry about trust, I think it's, doing what we say we're going to do is the most important thing, and I think that's the first obstacle that is absolutely the most paramount. So I think we've all been having to bid for business because we needed to grow our business or we needed to deliver some sort of P&L objectives. But I think when we are building a trust with our clients and putting forward who we are and who you are as a business, there's a place in the market for every type of contract or every type of operator. But it can't move forward if that discussion at the starting point is not built on honesty and openness. And then you find yourself sometimes having to create a box to fit things into. And I think that kind of moves away from actually getting the true story across. But yeah.
I think I can see it from both worlds, because until 14, 15 months ago, I was on the contractor side in a sales role, and that's where I've spent the majority of my career. So until I joined Litmus, and I am in a broader role, Simon and Joe very much work on the front line of the consultancy business. My role kind of oversees the various different aspects of the Litmus business, but a number of the things that you said kind of are on my agenda already. But one of the things that I hope I've been able to do since I've joined Litmus is bring real life experience of what it is like to bid for, win, lose, sometimes gain feedback, sometimes not, in terms of that process. And yeah, the traditional tender process in a lot of ways is fairly archaic. But I also back up a lot of what Joe has said is, and we have a role in this massively, is the education piece in terms of the clients and enabling the time to undertake a collaborative process, making sure that they are invested and the key stakeholders and the consumers within the business are invested. And are willing to really turn things upside down a little bit. In the university sector, obviously, for a long, long time, they've had that open dialogue. And that's something that I have always really pushed for, in whether I've been the salesperson or I've been on the consultant side. Why can't we have more of a dialogue approach to a tender? Because it's going to make the end result better for absolutely everybody. So, yeah, certainly one of the things when I first sat down and spoke to Joe and others on the board in terms of coming to join Litmus was that I wanted to bring that experience of being on the contractor side, working alongside operational colleagues who've been awarded contracts potentially off the back of a tender process that hasn't allowed full transparency or hasn't been able to get to the real crux of the issue. So yeah.
Candice, coming from the side, what's been your biggest eye-opener in learning it from the other side?
How much of it, I think for me, where I had frustrations of being on the contractor side, I would often put those at the hands of the consultant. And I think there is a lot that we have to do, and we as the consultant have to work really closely with our clients and with the contractors in order to open up that broader conversation, I think. Consultants have often been seen as a barrier, and yeah, perhaps in days gone by they were. But certainly I can speak from personal experience and professional experience with Litmus now that actually I think we've got a massive role to play in terms of that collaboration, opening up those conversations, challenging the status quo. And I think we can do that. I mean, one of the things I've done in the last 14 months, and I'm seeing many faces around here, is have those meetings over a cup of coffee, chat to the contractors and go, okay, what can we do to help you? Because, I mean, we're not going to be a business unless we have contractors willing to bid with us. So that's really important. And I think the consumer insight side of things, I mean, one of the things that we do, and we're doing it now with a number of our processes, before we even get to a tender process, is speaking to our clients and undergoing a really detailed consumer insight program beforehand, so that we're getting the views of the customer, the consumer, and then they are filtering into the tender questions, so that you're not having to shoehorn an answer in that you know is what's needed, but there's nowhere to answer and articulate that.
And your view on the Charter?
I think I think it's something that we absolutely need to explore, and I think I've seen a real shift in the sector as well in terms of that willingness and openness, not just between contractors. I think someone said it earlier, there's enough business out there for everybody, and a piece of business that Thomas Franks wins is not necessarily going to be the piece of business that you would want to win. So I think if contractors are willing to talk and work openly together, and we can support that through open conversation, debate, workshops, I think it's great. I mean, I've already written down a couple of things I'm going to speak to you about after this. Then I think that's something that we can facilitate for the better.
Great, thank you. Patrick, you see it from a completely different angle. You're kind of the supply side. Is that fair way of putting it? Working people. What barriers do you find? I know you're finding there are people are now opening up to be more open to conversations and more partnership conversations, question mark.
Yeah, being an Irishman, having a chat has become a bit naturally part of our tendency to go for a pint. But no, it's definitely having a conversation, and part of that is about really talking to people face to face. One word that's been mentioned here that I would take away is engagement, and I think that the engagement that people, especially from a technical side of things, and in helping businesses, is talk to them, see what the problems are. There is a very clear shift from a technical provider of moving from having one complete system to look after things to moving to a best-in-class solution. The example in comparison would be, well, Microsoft could do everything within your business. Are you really going to pay 6-7 plus figures to do it? If they did do everything so well, and for everyone and for smaller businesses, then why do we use Zoom? Why do we use that best in class to solve that specific problem? So I am seeing it from a different angle, also from the sustainability, from ESG, from food waste side of things, that I think that that's one of the biggest opportunities for all catering organisations within the room to be able to address that, because it's such an extensive problem. And again, I could throw statistics out left, right and centre when it comes to the extent of that problem. But I think that what people tend to do when they're measuring the likes of food waste, I don't want to go on a complete tangent from what you've asked me.
That's
but,
okay.
The food waste cost people see as that's the total cost, but the reality is that's only 53% of the total cost. There's also a 38% on top of that when it comes to labour that's wasted. There's another 9% when it comes to haulage. That's on top of the food waste, so it nearly doubles the effect of the actual food that's going in the bins. So what we'd like to do is to take a lot of the data and turn it into information.
But I think my question is, I get that. Are people more open to the discussion than they were before?
Yes. Ultimately, yes. I think when you have something that's compelling, that you can talk to them on a human level, I think people are a lot more willing to listen.
So you think relationships are good back and being the first thing, a priority? Is it back to, have we moved back away towards that?
Again, I'm coming from a standing start, coming into a sector that I've never worked in, coming with a solution that people don't know about. It's not like a brand that's in my back pocket. we're only as good as our last day's work and our last customer's bit of feedback. So we look to build upon that, to solve very real day solutions, not just for the people sitting at the top, but for all stakeholders coming in from the bottom. And when we can prove that, people are a lot more willing to engage.
Because one of the shifts I've seen in this room is actually the more into kind of young entrepreneurs who are making more progress faster than would have been the case.
I hope I'm included in that.
Of course you are. As I get older, everyone gets younger, believe me. So, but there seems to be more openness around the discussions everywhere.
Yeah, there is. And again, when you, as I said, when you approach people on a human level and then can bring to them a best-in-class solution to solve, in my case, I'm in the exciting world of inventory and margins, but when we can bring that and put it in a cloud in a way that no one else can, to make a dashboard that's engaging, that rather than spending the time in formatting Excel sheets and trying to analyse a margin, that they're not spending the time on collating it, they're spending the time on analysing it. And it comes back again to using, I'll be big into waste and into lean and things like that. And they say there's 7 types of waste that we have in businesses, but there is an 8th, and that's intellectual. And as it's getting harder and harder to put people into a lot of our businesses, what we find is we have to justify every labour hour that they're going to be working. And that's where I feel, as a technical provider, solutions provider, that's what we should be doing, is by taking away a lot of the mundane work they have to do and make their work a lot more quality.
Because one of the interesting things, I think, I know Graham somewhere in here, Graham Smith, Alex Partners, one of the interesting things from the research was that relationships came, I think, second in the research as being really important. There was a real shift back to relationships. Are you seeing that, Candice? Is it more about discussion now?
I think there's a real desire for that two-way relationship and that win-win scenario. But I also think that we need to change some of the mechanics to turn that from a desire into something that's actually achievable.
Okay.
So we've talked about the tender process and how we can all work to try and change that to a more collaborative, open process. But at the other end of the scale, I think we have to talk about the types of contracts that are out there that are going to enable the contractors to be able to come in and be truly innovative. So length of contract tenures, looking at things like evergreen contracts where a year's worth of success and meeting and those commitments that you've made, when you hit them, when you exceed expectations, you might then get an extra year on your contract tenure. So I think there's 100% a desire in terms of relationships and collaboration, but I think that more needs to be done to change that from an assumption into a reality.
So what would you like to see happen?
I think it comes down to that three-way communication and that tri-partnership. I think as a consultant, we can be that truly independent voice, mediator should it be needed in certain situations, and also to share best practice of where it has worked. I mean, there are still, unfortunately, a lot of relationships where is that kind of master and slave relationship, and that doesn't benefit anybody.
Isn't that dying or not?
I think it is, but it still exists, and I think equally there are probably some real best-in-class scenarios. You talked about the opportunity that you've just been successful with, so I think we need to shout about those more and show the real results of that, so that it's not just us talking about it, it's actually, well, this achieved X, Y, and Z.
Because one of the ideas we've been playing, I mentioned to Chris last week, one of the ideas we've been playing with is can we create a working party with a mixture of operators, consultants, and clients and suppliers all coming together for a conversation that actually helps drive this forward.
Why not? I mean, I went to another event the other day. It was actually by one of the contractors arranged it, but it was all of the consultants in the room. And that hadn't happened for a long time. But actually, I really saw a willingness of the consultants to be talking about shared problems, shared challenges, and how we as a group can move it on and support everybody. So I think there is a tide change in terms of that. And I think that certainly from my experience of being on this side of the fence for a short 14, 15 months, I can certainly see that there's a desire and a need to do it, and we would be fully on board in collaborating in that way.
Great, thank you. Patrick, obviously you come into this market. What surprised you about coming into the UK? Apart from Manchester United not doing well.
Yeah, we'll move on quickly. What surprised me, I guess, being Irish, you think that you're on one little island, and then there's your neighbour across the pond who's substantially bigger. When you come over here, you see the opportunity and you see the scale. But the problems are quite similar, regardless of whether you're Ireland, UK, Europe, or beyond. That everyone has their challenges when it comes to people, when it comes to tech, when it comes to providing solutions to their customers. I think that we all want to make a collaborative approach with our customers, with our suppliers. There's two different aspects to it. There's internal and there's external. Internally, we have to work with our suppliers, but also with our staff when it comes to solutions, and that we don't always have to come up with the solutions. Let our staff bring them into it and collaborate with them more. And then externally, then when it comes to the customers and the image that you portray, there's two very different ways that you can manage each. But I think that the internal and external approach is very important. But for me, the problems are very similar, regardless of where you go. Everyone complains about other people, but in general, it's a matter of bringing them in and having the conversations. Chris mentioned about having difficult conversations. How well you can handle those, that's an important one. But front up to it.
I think as an industry, we need to understand what best practice looks like. We need to agree what that looks like for the future. And I think, we each have a responsibility to act, to deliver it going forward, I think. And I think that's the basis and the starting point. And simplicity, charity, keep that every step as we move forward. It will definitely change the landscape as we move to the next stage in that.
Yeah, I think today's been great. I've really enjoyed it, but I think it's so important that we go away with actions. I think we need to leave this.
So you're supporting Sarah, is it?
Oh well, of course, of course, always. But no, I think she's absolutely right. I think we can't just have these meetings and have them and have them. I think we need to go away today with thorough actions and start bringing them to the table. And I think holding ourselves accountable for all of those key issues that still are there.
Andrew?
Yeah, my side is that we all have within our own business, we're all very good at doing what we do, but being more collaborative on it means that we can share these nuggets of wisdom that we have in order to have a best-in-class solution. I think that's really important. There's a man I worked with before in the west of Ireland who's always good for a story, and he said there's no point in winking at the good-looking girl in the Dark nightclub. It doesn't help you in any way at all. Doesn't know what you're doing. So there you go.
Candice?
I think for me, and you started at the beginning by opening up saying that this industry has come through some really unprecedented challenges over the last few years. And certainly I know that when I was working with Sodexo, things that we had in our business plan for 5 to 10 years down the line were happening yesterday. So it's forced real innovation in the sector, and I think that we need to carry that on now, because I think it's been a challenging time, but it's also the most exciting time for our sector. We've seen that in terms of some real industry shift. I'm sensing a real tide change in terms of new players coming into the market, boutique operations, niche operations, startups, and I think there's a fantastic opportunity, and they bring with them agility, creativity, challenge some of the big boys, and to do something different and do it faster, and I think that's really great. There's obviously been some significant activity of late as well, which is going to change the marketplace. Looking to my left over here, so I think it's really exciting, and I think that if we come off the back of this change and the innovation that really was forced upon the sector, and we keep rolling with that, and we keep the lines of collaboration open, I think that there's an opportunity to continue to raise the profile of the sector, and I think that in itself will hopefully get government listening, supporting the sector more so, and I think that together we can really continue on a really positive journey.
John?
Let's go to his own one.
I think, yes, just to build on that slightly, and to the point you made about contract catering, I think we do have a bit of a branding issue, and it's something, it's not a silly point, because I do think contract, I don't like the word contract, I actually like the word catering.
Do you like the word food service?
You know, not really. I think we've got to be a lot more positive about what we do and how we do it, and how we talk about our industry. You know, 1 in 3 people in the UK works in hospitality. Kate Nichols does an amazing job at UK hospitality representing, but when you see her on the BBC, she gets asked about what the pub chain's doing, what Costa doing, what the hotel's doing. Does anyone ever say, oh, what's the industry like in B&I? Or what's the industry like in schools or hospitals or stadiums? Never gets asked. No one knows we exist, and yet we're as big or even bigger as an industry. And yet we don't represent ourselves well as a single entity. I think we have a branding issue. I think we have a values issue in terms of what we commonly align on, which does go back to the Charter point. And how do we actively lobby government? Because I just think, yes, the government listens sometimes, but if we're employing 1 in 3 people, we should have a hell of a bigger voice. And yet much smaller industries have much higher access and I think voice with government. And I think there's some key issues that we are, as an industry, helping with in terms of supporting people, giving people great careers, giving them, you know, a foundation in industry that does pay well and can be really rewarding. And by the way, activating real change in the food system is the single biggest enabler to cut our carbon footprint as a country. We're already making huge progress on sustainable energy and wind energy and solar. The next big thing has to be looking at our broken food sector in terms of how we procure, how we encourage farmers to be more regenerative, and we can do that as a single entity, a single voice.
I'm smiling because this is a taste of John and I at the boardroom. Everyone's like, shut up, move on to the next subject. I'm going to try and finish, I guess, how I started. First of all, I think the industry's in great shape, and to your point, it's about timing with everything that we've been through. So I think we should be encouraged by the fact that we're in this place. I don't think we're delayed, I think we're right on time. But the first point was around actions and responsibilities and collaboration, push-pull. As an action, I think as caterers, we should be being bolder in challenging the process and trying to collaborate more with our end users and clients. I talked about the non-compliant proposal and the compliant. That's a great start. I think if we all start doing that, I think a shift will come. So from consultants, I'll probably go to point 2, which is just remember the power of the voice that you all have as consultants, as an impartial soundbite of the industry. If I'm talking about social media now, I don't see much great presence on social media from consultants. I see incredible social media presence from all caterers. There is a gap in the market for a consultant, be it independent trader or group, to lead the charge on having a big voice on social media, particularly LinkedIn, where the majority of our clients will surface and take advice. So I think there's a big opportunity there. So if you want to be a thought leader, perhaps my steer would be take the gap in the market on social media. If one does it, typically most will follow. And then the last point around social value, I don't think there's any action there. I genuinely believe it's you care about it or you don't, and that's just personal choice. My example on food waste, just around presentations, is highly tactical, but it's high risk in terms of the damage it can do as an industry. I think if I was to say there's one action, I would say within the charter, is give choice. You either do it or you don't. But I think the charter piece is probably the way to end it. If there's one tangible action that brings all of this together, it's a working group made up of operators, consultants, and clients, where they can all have a voice and we can talk about what's important to each party, and then have some hard lines and some guidelines. And I think that would be a cracking start.